In this video, I'm going to demonstrate to you how it's possible to generate comprehensive reports for your interview answers, of course with the goal to improve them, but more interestingly, what type of information can you expect to receive as feedback. And as you'll see next, it's pretty straightforward and to the point information which you can immediately use to improve your answers for the purpose of a job interview. For the purpose of this demo, I added a simple interview answer, which is pretty good already. As you see here, it's already in start format. And next I'm going to read it so we ensure we are clear on the example, and then I'm going to generate the report and go through each of the sections to see what type of feedback can one give for such an interview answer. So one of my initiatives working for a major US bank was to migrate our internal meetings from Citrix to Zoom. In spite of the many benefits it had, the first attempt to convince everyone it was the best by giving them as a choice had failed quite spectacularly. Aside from the IT department, no one else seemed to be interested in learning new software. So I decided to take ownership of the situation and set up a meeting with my top 10 executives, whom I promised to support during a 2-month trial in order to earn their trust. 9 out of 10 got on board, and all meetings they had with staff had to be made through Zoom. And this is when I started seeing real quantifiable progress in the numbers of people using Zoom over Citrix at our bank. As a result, 2 years on, 80% of the meetings are held on Zoom. Right, so notice here I also added a couple of behaviors here which I believe are the most representative for this story. So this is information that I inserted by hand manually in the software, and if we go to evaluate such an answer, it will generate a report something on the lines of this one, right? So right on top we have the original answer we provided, and then the first section will be the behavioral fit, which basically means for each of these behaviors, they will test and see whether your answer fits into these behaviors. And as I told you, this answer is pretty strong, so each of these behaviors, interpersonal influence, cross-functional, vision, strategic thinking, and ownership would work quite well for this type of answer. So in other words, the candidate will exhibit these behaviors for the purpose of job interview. What you could do here as well is not to enter any behaviors, and then it will tell you the key behaviors that it believes are the most relevant for that specific type of answers, and whether if that connects to what you thought would be the best possible choice. Now, the next section in the report would be specificity. The answer is, as you would expect, specific enough for a candidate applying for the position of senior IT consultant. It showcases the candidate's ability to identify and address a problem, take ownership of the situation, and successfully implement a solution which resulted in a positive outcome. However, in terms of specificity, this does not specifically mention when the story happened, right? So this would be an area where this answer could improve. Where? Okay, so it does not specifically mention where these events happen, even if it says for a major US bank. All right, so I don't believe this information should be under any non-disclosure agreement, so it could as well be mentioned there, and therefore improve your answers for the purpose of job interview. The more specific they are, the more relatable and the more convincing as well. Right, and this is, by the way, a problem in around 90% of interview answers, the one with specificity and mentioning when and where. Next one, metrics. Okay, so this answer, as you would expect, contains metrics, out of which the most interesting one would be the 80% of the meetings held through Skype, through Zoom here, right, in the results. So it does contain metrics, so no problem with this. Story title idea. So what do I mean by this? Whenever you're adding a story, you would have to label it somehow, and I labeled it for this a successful initiative. However, this type of title isn't particularly easy to remember. I mean, think of if you have 20 such stories, out of which 15 are successes, then it will be not straightforward to identify them. So based on some keywords from the answer itself, a more concise title for the story would be Successful Migration of Internal Meetings from Citrix to Zoom at a US bank, right? Which I believe is also super interesting because in my experience in this stories dashboard, around 95% of those stories could benefit from a better title, right? And in a job interview, especially if you want to keep a cheat sheet with some notes of the stories you'd want to really talk about, then giving them great titles is also important. Now, on the length of your answer, Okay, so this answer has 142 words, which would be around 1 or 2 minutes to tell in a job interview, which is not much. I mean, the way I recommend people, if you prepare for an interview, then you should be able to make sense and score high in clarity of thought, even if your answer would be 5 or even 10 minutes long. Right, so even so, I provide you with a shorter version of this answer if you want. So maybe this could be also a test to see whether the software actually got the key idea that you wanted to transmit in the answer. But more interestingly here, you're also provided with a longer version of this possible answer. And as you see here, it's pretty long and comprehensive. And I intentionally made it this actually as close as possible to 1,000 words, simply because I wanted to highlight that great long answers, so to the extent you're not rambling for 5 minutes straight, but longer convincing first answers tend to correlate with better interview success. Right, so give long convincing answers, and if you need an idea on how can your answer be made a bit longer, you could also generate one of these reports to see how it could work. Right, at least it gives you some pointers with this regard. I won't go through this example because it's a bit long, I feel, for the purpose of this video. Now, what about the star format? Well, as you see, right when I added the answer, it was already in the star format, but from experience, not many of your answers are in a good star format, and it will also evaluate on whether there is stuff to improve for the star format. Negativity. So the reason why I added such a filter is because some people have a tendency to be overly negative or overly pessimistic in their answers, and this specific answer is not framed negatively. However, it could benefit from a more positive framing if you want. You see, so I took ownership of the situation, arranged a meeting with my top 10 executive, I promised to support them, and so on and so forth. The decision to start showing real progress in just a short time, and after 2 years it worked, right? So it's framed a little bit more positively, but really the main thing with this filter is to see if your answer is a bit negative, and there are some instances where you could benefit from more positivity. Next one, dramatization. One problem with interview answers, especially with people who prepare for job interviews, is their answers tend to be a little static and not interesting at all. So what happens here, if you dramatize a little bit on the challenge or on the task, they will sound far better. Actually, here, in this example, it's at the beginning of the action, determined to turn the tide, I took it upon myself to take ownership of the situation. You see, so dramatization is another topic that you would want to consider for improving your answer for the purpose of job interview. And the impact was astounding. I mean, I'm not sure if that's your type of language, but dramatization is a valid area to look for when improving your interview answers. Lessons learned. Okay, so the lessons learned, it's something that could help make your answer more convincing and maybe a bit longer. This answer does contain a bit learnings, but maybe it's not emphasizing a lot of them. But anyway, this shows that the candidate learned the importance of gaining trust and support from key stakeholders, to successfully implement a change, right? And change isn't easy, so the lesson would make sense as lessons learned. What would be the top 5 interview questions for such an interview answer, right? So can you provide a situation where you took ownership, right? So one would be ownership, and how do you handle resistance or lack of interest from others when implementing a new software or process? Okay, so how did you convince someone of something, right? So these are possible interview questions. There are plenty of them. Also, maybe more interestingly for you, with regard to this example, the top 5 improvements for this answer. Okay, so one of them could be provide more context. Okay, so this answer should include more specific information about the specific key behaviors that are highlighted from the position title of Senior IT Consultant at Meta. right? So in this report, I took this position title and Meta as a target company. But looking at your own examples, it could also provide you some interesting insight as to how it could improve. Highlight problem-solving skills. Okay, so discussing challenges faced and strategies used to address them. Now, the challenge here, was that nobody was interested, and the fix was that they got their top 9 executives on board, and then everyone followed through. But I believe the topics for improvement could be super interesting for you to address also in your interview answers, and something which I felt made sense to talk about in many of the samples that I went through while generating this report and while trialing this with a few people, right? And the last section would be top follow-up and challenge questions. How did you initially approach the executives to convince them to try Zoom, right? So this is something which isn't mentioned, okay? And set up a meeting with my top 10 executives. Okay, but how did that meeting go? What did you say in that meeting? What were key there for success? Okay, so what specific strategies did you use to gain their trust using the trial period? Can you provide some examples of the benefits that Zoom offer over Citrix? So perfectly plausible follow-up or challenge question for a job interview. And these are some questions not only mean to help you to predict the type of questions you can expect, but also some questions to help you to improve your original answer. So you give the best possible answer from the first try, right? So these would be the main topics covered in the report. I believe it's maybe another reason for you to consider adding your stories into this stories dashboard on my website. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.